Hello everyone and welcome to the Cloud Lunch and Learn sessions. My name is Hugo Barona, and before I hand over to Dwayne, I would like to quickly introduce you the Cloud Lunch and Learn initiative. So this is an initiative organized by the community and for the community with the main goal of deliver online sessions related to the clouds and help community members share knowledge and learn from other members more about the clouds. So everyone is more than welcome to join us and contribute to make it a better and bigger initiative for the community. For more information of this initiative and sessions, please use the link on the slide to access its website. And any questions, feel free to contact me and I will provide you more details about this initiative. Now I hand over to Dwayne so we can start our session.
Thank you, Hugo. So this session is for becoming a certified Azure Developer Associate. So I appreciate everybody taking the time out of your day today, and good afternoon to you if you're joining in the US like myself. Good morning. So it's more of a breakfast and learn for me this morning. But we're going to talk about we're going to cover a general overview of Azure certifications, as well as then we're going to step through the objectives of becoming an Azure Developer Associate today. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Dwayne Natwick. I'm out of the United States in the Detroit, Michigan area. I've been in the IT industry for over 30 years and do a lot of authoring and training, and been doing more and more community speaking as well. Just finished, as some of you I've seen that are on this call, also participated in the Global Azure Virtual Sessions a week or so ago, which was a great event, great and fun event, lots to learn from all the community members. I do have multiple Azure and 365 role-based certifications. I'm also a CISSP and a PMP. And my day job is actually a product manager for cloud services for a managed service provider. I also am a certified trainer for Microsoft and a regional lead. So the plan today for this Lunch and Learn session is to provide you with some guidance on determining a certification path, building your certification roadmap, preparing for an exam, and I have also provided some learning resources for the preparation. Then we'll go through at a high-level overview the objectives of the Azure Associate Developer exam and some of the key areas to take into account when studying for that exam. And we'll talk then about the next steps in building your plan to pass the Azure Developer Associate exam. The key thing when you're building your certification roadmap and planning to jump into cloud certifications, if you're new to the Azure or any cloud certifications, do you just jump in, or what do you do to determine the direction that you want to go in? It's always important to create a roadmap for where you're looking to go in. Ask yourself, questions such as, what role do I play in cloud services? Where do I want my role to go into? And then where do I want my career to go into? Maybe not. Maybe you have aspirations to do something different in 1 to 5 years. Maybe today you're in infrastructure, but you want to get into developing. So mapping out and thinking of that roadmap and planning where you want to go professionally is an important first step to take. As you do that and you build that roadmap, then you can start to align that with the hands-on experience as well as the certifications in the area that'll help you get to that professional goal. Now you've built that roadmap and you have a plan. Now you're ready to start preparing for your first exam and your first certification. So, key thing I always like to say when I'm teaching a class or talking to somebody about certifications is in the Microsoft environment, the fundamentals exams are always a good place to start regarding your roadmap. It's not a required exam for any of the associate or expert certifications, but it's a good way to get started. It's a lower cost exam than the associate and expert exams. It gives a good foundation around all of the services that are provided within Azure in this particular case. And then for preparing for an exam, it's good to start with the Microsoft Learn site. If anybody caught my Global Azure session, which I know is up, the recording is up on YouTube, on the YouTube channel now. I talked a lot in that session about Microsoft Learn and how to get started with Microsoft Learn. What's great about it being, first and foremost, it's free, and there are learning paths for most certifications right on there, including the developer exam. Another good way to start preparing is build59s.com has self-assessment guides that Chris has created for almost all of the primary Azure exams. And what he's done is he has spreadsheets that are based on each of the objective areas of the exams, and you can go through and just rate yourself based on percentage of understanding of that area, and it gives you a good idea right off the bat where your skill gaps might be and understand what you need to prepare and focus on in terms of the exam and from a hands-on perspective. So and then obviously Microsoft Docs, we'll hit on that a little bit more. Hands-on learning is important with Microsoft. There is Microsoft Learn does have, with some of their learning paths, actual lab work and exercises within there that steps you through some of that. So those are all good resources. And then other online learning resources that you can find from other community members. And this highlights mainly some of the things I talked to in the previous slide, but just to hit on it again, in terms of a lot of the free learning resources are Microsoft Learn. Again, there is a AZ 203, 204 developer exam learning path right on there. The Microsoft Docs is a great resource, and you can find even direct links to a lot of that on Azure Greg's blog pages. He provides a lot of study guides for those for the objectives with direct links to the Microsoft Docs pages, so you don't have to go searching around within Microsoft for those. Microsoft Hands-on Labs, they're doing a lot of adjustments to some of those, but there are some self-paced labs that you can find on Microsoft as well that are free labs without having to create your own Microsoft tenant. And Microsoft does provide a lot of free resources within the Azure portal that you can also utilize for hands-on services, many of which from the Azure developer standpoint, when we go through the objectives, a lot of those are low cost or free resources to get started, and Microsoft provides, when you go into portal.azure.com for the first time, will provide free credits for the first month, which will help you get through your exam. And then a lot of community members have their own blog sites, as well as myself, that provide a lot of resources to help you prepare for exams, which is always helpful. So now we'll move into the specifics of the Azure Developer Associate exam. Keep in mind, if you are preparing right now for this particular exam, that the 203 exam is going to retire August 31st of this year. So right now they're in a transition period of the number from 203 to 204. What we're going to talk about is the 204 objectives. The 204 isn't quite, I don't think, out of beta yet. It might be out of it. I'm not sure if you can schedule it now because the beta window closed. We might be in between there, but it should be released fairly shortly, in fairly due time. And then August 31st of this year, the 203 will be retired. So there's going to be a little bit of time where there's both exams can be scheduled. You only need to take one of the exams, and keep in mind that it doesn't matter which exam you pass, you have that developer associate certification for 2 years from that pass date. Just because 203 retires August 31st doesn't mean after September 1st I don't have that certification anymore and I have to go to the 204. I have to take the 204 exam. That is not the case. The weighted sections are on here. We're going to go through that a little bit, what section weighting is in the next few slides. So, but you can see here there are two areas that make up 50 to 60% of the exam. The first of these weighted areas is the develop Azure Compute Solutions. So as you can see, this, again, 25 to 30% of the exam. So to give you a little bit of basis, if there are 50 questions on the exam, you could get approximately 15 questions based on this objective. That is not necessarily a one-to-one ratio. Keep in mind, if you're not familiar with the Microsoft exams, they are a weighted point scale on 1,000 points. So even though you have 50 questions, you've got 1,000 points, and 700 or higher is required to pass the exam. I use 50 questions as a basis because you're generally going to see between 40 to 50 questions on most exams. The key to this objective is to understand ARM templates and Docker services are key to the compute services. And then you have container services, which for this exam, Kubernetes is not in the scope. We have app services, which are key in here. So a lot of the compute resources within here, web app, auto-scaling your web apps, so understanding how the subscriptions work for web apps. And the web app APIs and configuring those are a big part of this. So we're talking about platform services a lot within this objective area. They've taken some of the IaaS pieces out of this that might have been in there before, and then Azure, implementing Azure functions, which goes along with the next slide a little bit with some other of the serverless features, but these are kind of the key things to understand here. If you don't know Docker, when I was preparing for this exam, I was using Scott Duffy's course, and I followed along as he downloaded Docker. He created the Hello World web app. I followed along with him on that to understand how Docker worked and how it tied into the Azure environment, which was really helpful. So it's important to download Docker, play with Docker, as well as understand what you need to do in terms of the Azure portal, and templates to configure are very key within this knowledge area. But again, make sure, in terms of container services, it's Azure Container Services, not Kubernetes. So just important to understand that. That's called out right in the objectives when you pull the objectives down, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes as well. So the next piece, again, is weighted just as much as the previous objective area is the Azure Services and third-party services. So this one is where we find the Logic app API management, event grid, notification hubs, event hubs, and all of those serverless messaging and essentially free services for the most part, with the exception of what it uses in terms of storage. So getting into the Azure environment and playing with these to get an understanding of how logic apps work, how event grid, notification hubs, and all of those pieces work are going to be very helpful for you, and you're not going to incur any cost if you set up your app services for pay as you go. You're not going to it's not going to cost you anything from a standpoint of what you're utilizing in terms of how you're using those apps, because the app services are based from a consumption standpoint, are based on are based purely on the volume that you are getting into your app service. And when you're playing with it, you're not going to be hitting those parameters that are going to hit the cost base. So it's very easy to set these services up and not incur a cost or much cost, with the exception of storage. That's really going to be your main cost in terms of those key areas. The next three areas, as we've already covered, 50 to 60% of the exam, are important pieces all the same. So keep that in mind. Obviously, implementing Azure security is a very important area within all Azure services. So even though implementing Azure security is not may only be a 15 to 20% exam criteria, there's going to be security questions intertwined in those other two highly weighted areas regardless. You're gonna see, we mentioned API management in the first in the compute objective. API management, obviously a key point to API management is security. So understand that with the weight of the exam and the 1,000 point scale, you're going to have questions, you're going to have case studies that are going to intertwine these objectives to a degree. It's the objective percentage is just to give you an idea of how many potentially direct questions you might get around security, around authentication and authorization, again, around securing APIs, apps, and resources. You need to understand what those are in a foundation of development anyway. So, and there's always, in just about every Azure certification, a security objective within them. Azure Storage is again another is only a 10 to 15% area, but as we mentioned earlier, you have storage queues that are part of the compute objective, or the Azure Services objective. That all falls into the blob storage account and the capabilities of like a Gen 2 storage account, how you're utilizing storage, how you're feeding information into containers, into your APIs, and delivering content to users from a web basis. These are the two key areas. You're going to get Cosmos DB storage and blob storage as your key skills to understand here. Key thing whenever you're seeing a low latency, globally redundant storage solution in a question, Cosmos DB is generally the answer. Just to give you a little pointer and a tidbit, understand the differences between the two, where the two would be utilized, and you should be pretty good to go within the Azure storage area. That's a key point to know, even when you go back to the Azure Services, is understanding where each of those would work. Notification hubs, event hubs, all of those hub type serverless models, there's different key application areas for each, and understanding what those are is an important piece to passing the exam. The fifth and final area that we'll talk about is monitoring, troubleshooting, and optimizing. So again, this is another one that you might find questions intertwined in case studies and things within the Azure environment. Even though 10 to 15% of the exam, you might only see 5 direct questions around, say, Azure Monitor or troubleshooting a API or a logic app, for instance. But it's important. The key measured areas within here, again, are monitor and logging are important, and then content delivery networks. You might get a question or two on content delivery networks and how those can help optimize your app service for availability and decrease latency. As we said with Cosmos DB, that's globally redundant, decreasing latency. Content delivery networks are very similar from a networking standpoint to deliver content with the least latency by using edge devices and edge locations that are close to a user's access point. So to summarize what we've talked about here, and we talked about taking that self-assessment and understanding and building your roadmap. Again, if you just Google build 5 nines, you can find those assessments pretty easily. I've also there's a link to this slide deck here on the slide that you can find that link as well. That's on the previous slide. Microsoft Learn is a great resource, and Microsoft Docs. Those, again, free resources. Never a bad idea to start with preparing with free resources. Creating an Azure account for hands-on, as well as checking out the self-paced hands-on labs within Microsoft and what they have. Again, Microsoft Learn has done a good job, especially with some of these developer exams, to put some hands-on lab exercises within the Microsoft Learn learning paths, which don't cost you anything. You get a little bit of hands-on. It steps you through it so you don't have any issues. And then feel free to reach out to myself for any additional questions or additional guidance. And as Hugo said at the beginning, we might. He's got the Lunch and Learn objective that he's working on. He has some other sessions that he'll probably talk about, or if you go out to the Cloud Lunch and Learn site, you can find some additional sessions in the future. And I'm happy to provide future sessions that go a little deeper into the objective areas. And I didn't look at the chat. I don't think there were any questions on the chat. Does anybody have any questions or anything that they'd like to ask while we're working through the quiz?
Dwayne, we have no questions on the chat so far, but I actually have a question for you. I think it's
yes, sir.
It's actually a question that a lot of people start to think when they start to define a plan to study for these certifications. Is how long should I take to prepare for this exam? Because sometimes since we don't have metrics about in average how long it would take for us to study and be prepared for the exam, mm-hmm. Sometimes we try to rush and we end up going to the exam not well prepared and failing. And of course, this has a cost. So that's actually a question that I have for you.
Yeah, that's a good question. It's going to be, it's going to depend on how comfortable you are initially with the material. If you're looking for a change in role and for example, we'll just use the developer exam for example. If you're an infrastructure person and want to adjust your role and adjust your career path more to the developer type of role, you're probably going to need some more time to prepare. A lot of times, if you take say an online course or a in-person course, those courses are about 4 days usually for the Azure developer. You probably, in those exam prep courses that have labs and those type of things, doing that, and then maybe another week or two of your own preparation, reading through the Microsoft Docs, depending on what your pace is and how fast you read and comprehend materials. You're probably looking at 3 to 4 weeks to get yourself ready for an exam if you're going in essentially without having that experience yourself. If you have that experience, if you've worked with Docker, if you've done Azure, if you set up web apps, and if you do that self assessment and you find, hey, I'm at 80% for most of these objective areas, I can focus on the ones that I'm below that. You can maybe prepare and get ready in a couple weeks to take the exam. It's not going to be that difficult for you at that point. I generally have spent I probably took about 3 to 4 weeks preparing for this exam. Where some of the other ones, when I did the admin associate, I probably did again 3 to 4 weeks, but then I went right into the architect exams because, for one thing, the first architect expert exam has a large amount of the same material as the associate admin exam, and then the 301 exam, which will be the 304 exam here shortly, was a designing Azure environments, and design and architecture is really where my skill set lies. So I only prepared for that one for probably a week and a half, less than week and a half, 2 weeks for that exam. So it all depends on where your role is. If you're looking at changing your role, you're probably going to need more time to prepare for the exam.
Yeah, it's fair enough. We have actually one question here on the chat, and the question is the AZ204 also 150 minutes, and is that usually enough time if you are prepared? So
most of the exams, yep. Yeah, I think when you schedule it, it's like 180 minutes, but when you get in the exam, they take out a lot of the survey time and everything. So I think the 180 minutes when you schedule it is a guideline to prepare your amount of time for it. But yeah, they take about, I think they do take like 30 minutes off of it. It is enough time. The only exam that I've ever taken that got me tight to the end of the time frame, and mind you, I've taken every one of the exams, whether in beta or live format, was the 300 exam, the first of the Azure Architect Expert. And I've found out from many other people as well that they finished it with 10 to 15 minutes to spare, and I was about the same. All the other exams are generally pretty quick, as long as you don't have any lab issues. So you might find, and this is another question that I see a lot in forums and a lot of people asking is does this exam have labs on it? It's always good to be prepared for a potential lab on any of the Microsoft exams anymore. They're trying to build labs into a lot of the exams. My understanding and what I've heard is they've pulled some of the exams out of the Azure exams recently because they were trying to make sure that the production services were getting priority within the Azure environments. So they didn't want it to be overrun by lab work, by people going in and doing labs in tests and things like that. So keep that in mind, that the hands-on and getting into the Azure environment and understanding how those services are configured is an important thing to understand and an important thing to know when you go into those any of the Azure exams now, with the exception of probably the fundamentals. You're not going to really get any labs in fundamentals, but most of the exams do have a lab component, or could have a lab component.
That's perfect. I see people interacting here on the channel, but I don't see any other question. I actually have one more question. I think it's relevant. So for those who started to study already for the AZ 203, what are the main differences comparing to the 204, if the people will basically end up doing the...
Yep. Yes, that's a good question. Let me pull up right now. I can pull up the... Here is the, if you go into the Azure portal or Microsoft Learn and look up the developer exam, or look up AZ204, what Microsoft has done is they have taken and done the shown the objectives for the 203 here, and then if you scroll down further in the exam objectives, you can see down at the bottom they've redlined what has been changed within these exam objectives. So you can see here, as I pointed out, they took AKSs out of scope. They do have a little bit on provisioning VMs for remote access, but again, other points to take into account within here. So understanding these objectives and going through these objectives, you can see with the red lines are essentially new areas that they've put in, such as data lifecycle management is a key one here within using blob storage. Understanding what hot, cool, and archive storage tiers are important to understand. So you can see from the red lines what has been changed, what they've changed in terms of the percentage areas. You can see the connect and consume Azure services. They didn't change any of the objectives from the 203 to the 204, but they've increased the weighting of that. So you can see the differences and everything there within here. So it's again good to understand. The first thing I always do when looking at and going through an exam is understanding these objectives. And as I said, Gregor Sudi has done a great job of taking these objectives and linking them to the Microsoft Docs. So kudos to Gregor for all the help he's already given you. If you go to his GitHub or to his blog site that has links to his blog, or to his GitHub, he's done a lot of this work for you already. So thanks, Gregor. All right, you want to talk about this slide, Hugo, while I go and look and see how people have done on the forum.
So Microsoft provided this link, so you can basically access free educational resource, learning guides, and get some practice in relation to the certification. So you can access these materials by scanning the QR code or accessing the aka.ms link included on this slide. And you will be able to easily register and access to all these materials for free. And we should be good. I also included on the channel a link to a quick survey. I would like to ask you if it's possible to take a few minutes of your time and just fill the survey with answering some questions, so we can understand how well was this session. And most importantly, we will understand which kind of sessions you are expecting in future to attend, so we can guide the content according to your needs and provide the content that you are expecting. So I hand over back to you, Dwayne.
Yes. Yep. Thanks. So everyone, feel free to reach out to me on social media. I know Hugo's active on social media as well, and I know we've got this session listed on cloudfamily.info site. You can go and get to the link to the future Cloud Lunch and Learn sessions through there as well. So thanks everybody for joining today.